Well, it's been a while, so where did we leave off? Ah yes, Phoenix Wright completed his 3-year journey into becoming a lawyer worthy of Mia's praise and has earned the respect of all his compatriots. The trilogy ends on a high note, leaving the player wondering about the bright future ahead of them. So how do we get to this? And this? And more importantly, why should you be hesitant with the Apollo Justice Attorney Trilogy? Before I go into more detail, this is just a reminder that this is my opinion of a biased Ace Attorney fan. If you were to ask me, would you recommend this trilogy? I would say yes, since the games are still solid at its core. However, to put into perspective, I would give the first trilogy of Phoenix Wright, Justice for All, and Trials and Tribulations a 9 to a 9.5 out of 10, where I would give the trilogy of Apollo Justice, Dual Destinies, and Spirit of Justice an 8 to an 8.5 out of 10. This is still a respectable score and worthy of your time, but there is a considerable difference between the trilogies. Also, I may reference the first trilogy, which if you aren't familiar with the details, I have made a video on it, which is in the description. The video is also helpful since I will be talking about similar topics like music, gameplay, and story being at the forefront again. Finally, similar to the last video, I will try my best to avoid major spoilers and focus solely on the overarching story progression. However, it is understandable with these types of games that what I will say will likely ruin the experience, and I'll reiterate again that these games are worth it, especially since the trilogy was re-released last year and it's very likely that you have yet to experience the game because of the lack of support on all devices. What idiot would spend $30 on each game on their mobile devices? Okay, I'm that idiot, but if you want to go in blind, I would recommend not watching this video. Alright, let's start with music. As a cornerstone of the franchise, it is very important for this to be right, and thankfully the music is still phenomenal within these games. In fact, you can make an argument that the music has gone better with both Dual Destinies and Spirit of Justice both getting orchestrated soundtracks, which is a real quality booster. It really boils down to personal preference, but at its core, the music is still as good as ever. Gameplay also saw some improvements with this trilogy, mainly due to the introduction of new characters and mechanics. The core gameplay remains intact from the first trilogy, with trials and investigations remaining at the forefront. There were some smallest changes, such as for Dual Destinies and Spirit of Justice. A new feature exclusive to trials is revisualization, which near the end of the case, the player's character takes a step back and looks at all the case facts to paint a picture towards a conclusion. The sequence is very fast-paced, and it does a great job of adding to the build-up of the gameplay in conjunction with the music formula. There's also a new trial mechanic specific to Spirit of Justice called the Divination Seance, which lets you use the victim's final moments along with their 5 senses to determine what truly happened. However, the large changes are with character-specific items, which are Apollo's Bracelet and Athena's Mood Matrix. These items are very similar to Phoenix's Magatama in the sense that they are tied to a character themselves, and the items being alternative methods of getting information. For the bracelet, Apollo focuses in and allows him to see when people tense up when they lie, and allows them to press them further when he points it out to them. Okay, logically, that's kind of dumb, but spirit mediums exist in this world, so we will move on. Athena's Mood Matrix is more straightforward, allowing her to see people's feelings during testimony, and okay, this may be even worse. They can be happy, sad, shocked, or angry, and the way it's used is to figure out the contradictory emotion. They also added a journal to the game where if someone gets stuck with what to do next, they can open the journal and figure out where to go. There are some instances where you can get confused, and I'm looking at you, Rise from the Ashes, but it's an overall quality of life change that helps new players, which I can understand. You can more than go without using this mechanic, so it's not a huge deal. Overall, I would say the gameplay is a net positive as well. Well then, what's the issue? Unfortunately, the trilogy, in my opinion, falls a little short at the most important obstacle, and that is story, which is due to its direction. The first trilogy was simple with this matter, with Phoenix being the main protagonist, and we played through his quest to become the best lawyer he could be. Many other characters like Edgeworth and Maya go through their own major arcs and are interwoven easily with each other, since you're only following one person. However, with the Apollo Justice Trilogy, we technically have 3 main characters, Apollo, Phoenix, and Athena. Even though they are at different stages of their career, they all need major arcs throughout the games. On top of the side characters that need meaningful arcs too, the length of each game is just not enough to fit them all in. So, as you will see, they either get arcs that are more in the background, which you may like based on your preference of storytelling, arcs that seem underdeveloped, or they usually get shafted. And unfortunately, this line starts with the first game, Apollo Justice Ace Attorney. The game takes place 7 years after the events of Trials and Tribulations, and we start with the tutorial case, Turnabout Trump, which in my opinion is the best case in the entire trilogy, which may seem baffling. How can a case that on average is only 2 hours long, which a good amount of the time is teaching a player the game, surpass these full-length cases? Well, I believe it comes down to the actions and shock value of one individual. The case starts with our first look, or rather dialogue, of our new lawyer Apollo Justice, who is nervous with this being his first case. He is assured by Christoph Gavin, who is Apollo's senior. Interestingly, Apollo is the one leading the defense, out of the request of the client, who is Christoph's good friend. The friend in question is hobo. But on closer inspection, it turns out to be our old friend Phoenix Wright, the defendant for this case. Immediately, you get a different feel from the person we followed the past 3 games. He's very relaxed with his hands in his pockets, disheveled with his appearance, and almost looks disinterested while talking to Apollo. You also get a sense that he's hiding something from you, with his dialogue being very vague at times, which Apollo was not happy about. Another vital point during this case is Phoenix's reputation, with it sounding like a fall from grace, with a statement of a case from 7 years ago being an infamy within the universe, with him being the center of it. These factors, in my opinion, is what draws the players in, with him being the polar opposite of his happy, prideful, and at times predictable character in the original trilogy. Throughout the case, his character goes down this new path, with Phoenix being a part of a poker syndicate underneath a former mob hideout, which is where the murder takes place. No one even knows who the victim is, and everything just seems shady, with many points of contention being questioned, but Phoenix not revealing any more than he needs to. This case sets the tone for the game, with a sense of distrust being prevalent throughout. In terms of Apollo, I'll be honest, he's just a pawn in this case, with Phoenix being the main guy steering him to certain conclusions. In conjunction, a new trait with Phoenix, his actions throughout are cold and calculated, very similar to old Edgeworth, which again is just vastly different from the first trilogy. He was able to deduce who the true killer was because the victim was bald, and he instructs Apollo with pinpoint accuracy to lead him. That's how insane it is. The icing on top of the cake is that Phoenix even forges evidence, and Apollo uses it to get the true culprit. Like, this character 180 from someone we spent countless hours with is just genius to give Phoenix a new direction. Also, we are introduced to his daughter. Oh yeah, he has a daughter, who is also a magician. So just from the first case, we want to know who his daughter is, what happened 7 years ago, and why Phoenix is acting like this. And we don't know who the victim is still. To achieve this in just over 2 hours is incredible and is almost a perfect start for the trilogy. Apollo unfortunately does take a backseat to this case, which I understand given the top is being said, but surely he gets more moments as he gets more experience working for Phoenix. Right? Well, we transition into the next case, Turnabout Corner. After the events of Turnabout Trump, Apollo goes to work for Phoenix, but we said we get met by Trucy Wright, his daughter. Confusion ensues since she is 15 years old while Phoenix is 33 during this game, but she is adopted and another great character in the series. She fills the assistant role in the game wonderfully and has excellent chemistry with Apollo, almost as if they are siblings. Anyways, as they settle down, the case has an interesting premise. Since Apollo just joined them and Phoenix doesn't respect him as a lawyer yet, he has to investigate 3 crimes. The first one being the local noodle stand was stolen, which, no issue. The second being that Phoenix was hit by a driver that sends him flying into a telephone pole and he only receives a sprained ankle, because of course. And 3, someone stole Trucy's panties. And of course, when investigating these issues, it turns out to be a murder in which the accused is the mafia boss's kid and his girlfriend enlists Apollo's services. If this sounds complicated, I don't blame you, but it is a solid case. It is odd to have a more comical case after the bombshell of the first, but this is Ace Attorney's specialty to get the most random topics and arcs to somehow make sense. The case as well introduces us to 2 main characters of the game. The first is the main detective, Emma Skye, the same girl from Rise to the Ashes, essentially making that case canon. She is still obsessed with science, but overall is not in a great mood in this game since she's a lead detective instead of a forensic investigator, which is a promotion by the way, and dealing with the other character, Clavier Gavin, who is the main prosecutor and Kristoff's younger brother. He turns out to be the lead of a famous band and returns to the law world to clash with Apollo. He's the cliche cool rock star that woos everyone, but don't let that fool you with him being a great prosecutor. To add another twist to the Ace Attorney formula, Clavier is the first prosecutor that is not openly antagonistic towards the attorney and is a much needed reprieve in my opinion. Both sides are focused on the truth and Gavin is more than willing to help Apollo. I hate to admit it again though, that I do think that Apollo gets disrespected a little too much again. I understand this is his second case ever, but he doesn't get his big moments as he should. In fact, the gameplay behind me shows that Trucy gets the big moment in the case instead of Apollo. Like, that's crazy. Imagine if Maya deducted a major point in Turbo's sisters in the original trilogy. It would be so weird. However, even replaying these games again, Apollo still grew on me, since he has something that Phoenix didn't have. He doesn't fully believe in people. I know that may sound like a bad thing, especially since the prior trilogy that was one of Phoenix's cornerstones in fully believing his clients, but I think this gives Apollo an edge. He's not blinded by emotional bias and focuses solely on the truth, a trait that I think makes his character more interesting and more compelling to dive in further. Anyways, we get into the third case, Turnabout Serenade, which takes place at a music concert where Clavier's band is playing alongside a singer-pianist duo from the fictional country Borginia. The duo in question is La Memoire, the siren of the ballad, and Machi Tobai, the blind pianist. Just go with it, please. They are also accompanied by their manager-interpreter Romain Latouche. Apollo and Trucy were invited by the prosecutor to attend, while while Ima happened to be the lead security for the concert. During the third act of the concert, Apollo was taking a break while talking to Ima, and they hear a couple of shots from Lamorar's dressing room, and it turns out the Remain is critically injured. But before he dies, he says that Lamorar is a key witness. Chaos ensues with Clavier losing his mind with the concert, and now there is no murder that seems to be tied to the lyrics of a song they just debuted. In terms of the case, Apollo finally does the most in court and investigations, being way more confident and not needing as much assistance showing his progression. But the case sucks! During these events, it turns out that the defendant and key suspect is the blind pianist Machi Tobai, even though the murder weapon is a .45 caliber gun, which only experts can use, and he's 18 and blind! This is the scapegoat case of the game due to the previous point and has one of the most tedious parts being a video of the concert that's evidence. That is 15 seconds long, and you can't skip it, and you have to see it many times to find contradictions. For the story, Apollo also grows a little closer to Gavin, since this case is very personal with it happening at his concert. We see Gavin in a different, more grounded to a certain degree light, which creates a better connection with him and Apollo. We also get some backstory on Trucy, since there's a magic trick involved, with her uncle Valent being the one behind it. It turns out she is the descendant of the Gramarye family, who birthed the greatest magician group of the world, Troop Gramarye. The creator was Trucy's grandfather, Magnifi Gramarye, and her bio father was Valent's brother, Zach Gramarye. The troop was the best thing since sliced bread, but unfortunately, a tragedy occurred 7 years ago. Now, we get into the final case, Turnabout Succession, and this is the first case in the series in my opinion that the final case isn't the best in their respective game. The case is still great in many aspects, however I prefer the first case in terms of shock value, and this case does have an issue which is discussed later. The case starts with Apollo and Trucy's usual banter, but Phoenix comes in and tells them about a secret project he's been teasing the last 2 cases. Apparently due to many issues with the current law system with the Dark Age upon us, they're testing out the jury system and Phoenix is leading the charge. The first test will be a murder trial and Apollo's leading the defense. The victim is a hermit artist by the name of Drew Misham, and the defendant is his daughter Vera Misham. Obviously, there are many questions based on that description, however the bigger twist in the trial is that the victim is somehow connected to the trial 7 years ago that made Phoenix lose his badge. So for the next few hours after a preliminary Apollo trial and investigation, you play as the man himself with a trial and investigation to finally get some answers. The trial obviously takes place 7 years ago, and it's about the murder of Magnifi Gramarye, and the defendant is none other than Zach Gramarye, who is accompanied by Trucy. What a coincidence! Also before this trial, Phoenix is given a weird piece of evidence which comes back later. The prosecutor for the trial was, of course, Clavier Gavin, which this is his first trial. Anyways, the trial goes through the motions with Magnifi being on his deathbed, but asking both Zach and Valent to visit him before he dies. As the trial looks to be over, Phoenix presents that piece of evidence mentioned earlier, which Gavin calls a private testimony, in which Drew Misham appears and gives testimony that the evidence was forged, thus causing Zach Gramarye to be found guilty in his trial due to this reason. However, as a true magician, he disappears without a trace. I wonder where he is. The aftermath is Phoenix losing his badge and Trucy being taken into his care. The following investigation is the most unique one in the entire series, which is the Mason system. This is where Phoenix investigates between the time of 7 years ago after the trial and present day, and you go back and forth to figure out the truth. It is an interesting concept, however it can be overly convoluted at times, since evidence found in the present can be used in the past, and you travel back and forth, which doesn't really help. However, once the investigation is done, it is pretty obvious who is behind everything, and the last trial is Apollo trying to take them down. I won't spoil any more than that, but you can guess that they get it done, and really the final major point, apart from Apollo reminiscing on his journey, is that Phoenix is talking about the direction of the law world, the Dark Age if you will. So overall, we do get the answers for the questions and how Phoenix came down this path and the events leading up to this game. But it's crazy to think about that Phoenix, the man who would fall into any trap from the prosecutor with a narrow-minded approach of the law with solely focusing on truth or belief in his client, could transform into a meticulously working machine from the shadows, taking 7 years to take down a culprit and thinking of every possible way they could escape and shutting them down. It is mind-blowing, and I love the way his character is left off. But wait, what about Apollo? You know, the guy on the damn cover. As you can gather from this deposition, he's once again takes the back seat for this case. The final case. In his own game! Surely he does get much better throughout the case, but come on, the guy's basically still Phoenix's lackey. In spite of the main issue with the focal point of the game, I do think that Apollo Justice is a very solid game. I personally like Apollo as an attorney with his brash demeanor yet awkward attitude, makes him an entertaining character. Trucy is the perfect companion for him, with Apollo's personality to give laughter. Clavier is a breath of fresh air in terms of his personality, with his goal finding the truth while not antagonizing Apollo outside of a few jokes makes them a formidable duo. Finally, the start of the show of Phoenix, his charactership is very intriguing. He doesn't have his badge by the end of the game, meaning there's a lot of room to possibly going further. I'm sure that another game of fleshing out these dynamics that people will grow fond of this new style. You want to guess the only thing they really took over? The Dark Age of the Law! Yes, in the next game, Dual Destinies, the main element that gets transitioned from Apollo Justice is the Dark Age of the Law concept mentioned really in the last case. Sure, the main characters appear again and Apollo's and Phoenix arcs continue, with others varying in use, but it's put on the back burner or scrapped. So here we are again needing a new story to set us in a new direction, and this is done with a new character, Athena Sykes. I don't mind Athena as a character. She is bright, cheerful, full of emotion and fight, reminiscent of someone her age. Her story is explored in this game and is one hell of an experience for someone to go through, but in spite of all that, she makes you smile and she fits well with the agency. However, as you can guess, this moves Apollo to the side, which is slightly frustrating, but they do attempt to arc with him. Also, a side note, I won't be talking about the DLC cases for either Dual Destinies and Spirit of Justice, since I want to focus on the main game. With that in mind, we start again with a tutorial case of Dual Destinies Turnabout Countdown. We also get fully animated cutscenes in this game and the next, but it starts off hot with an explosion in the courtroom. The trial that ensues is about murder to a detective Candace Arm who died in the blast. The main suspect is a high school girl, Juniper Woods, Athena's childhood friend, and clearly all the motive in the world to bomb a yeah, she kinda does have a motive, huh? Anyways, Apollo was the original attorney, but due to injuries sustained in the blast, he cannot continue. Therefore, Athena steps in her first trial by herself and second trial overall. From the intro, Phoenix was talking to someone on the phone saying how she was hired 6 months ago from the game's beginning, and her specialty is analytical psychology, specializing in human emotions, which is very useful in court. However, she's still new, and as you can guess, the trial does not go as planned. In fact, she has some sort of panic attack, which we get a small glimpse into her backstory, and oh my god, how horrifying. Anyways, when all hope is lost, her knight in shining armor comes in to save the day. Yep, Phoenix is back with his attorney's badge and normal attitude. He's more mature, sure, but virtually none of his Apollo Justice character is here, with him going back to his bluffing ways with lack of foresight. It just sucks in my opinion, wasting all the character work they did in the last game. The trial goes without a hitch if you're not Apollo, and it ends on an intriguing note with Apollo leaving the agency, which piques your interest. The lack of respect from Phoenix was a theme in Apollo Justice, so it's likely a continuation of it. However, at the end of the case, Athena reminisces on the Apollo she met, leading to the next case, the monstrous turnabout. This takes place in Nine Tails Vale, a village in the mountains where daughter of the village Jinxie Tenma invites both Trucy and Apollo to a yokai festival. Unfortunately, the alderman of the village was murdered, releasing an imprisoned yokai into the wild. The person being pinned is Jinxie's father, Damien Tenma, who happened to be in the room, and the mayor of the preceding town. He is a great defendant who looks very intimidating but is very respectful and likable, similar to Royal Powers in Turnabout Samurai. Unfortunately, this case is just ass. It just feels like a tutorial case with the player really having a severe lack of control over their actions. The game even moves you automatically during the investigation, which plagues Dual Destiny as a whole. Also, the case makes the killer so obvious that the only way to make it more obvious is to show him killing the victim, which they did! Oh, and this is Apollo's only case in this game. Even better. Also, remember Trucy, the pivotal assistant of Apollo Justice, and in this case, she's the best friend of the defendant's daughter, the only connection to these people. She leaves after 10 minutes as you meet Athena and she becomes your assistant. Which, just why? And overall, she really has no role in the game, which again is a shame for how well she is written in Apollo Justice. But I can't complain too much as I like Athena as well, with her brash, wearing emotions on her sleeve attitude while trying to help her friends. She fits great with Apollo and Phoenix. And we also get introduced to two more important characters, which apart from Athena and Apollo carry the case. Firstly, we get Detective Bobby Fulbright, who makes Gumshoe look like a genius. I mean, he didn't even realize his shoes were stolen, but he does his job as a comic. Secondly, we get Prosecutor Simon Blackwell, a death row inmate who is a prosecutor, a samurai, and worst of all, British. Jokes aside, he's an excellent character, with him knowing analytical psychology as well while being a little violent in the courtroom. The best part is Fulbright is Blackwell's supervisor, which is just as amazing as it sounds. We also get some small tidbits about the story, with Athena recognizing Simon and his sentencing being the cause, strangely, of the Dark Age of the Law. Moving on, we get Turnabout Academy, which as you can guess takes place at a law school. Phoenix gets invited to do a seminar at the school along with a prosecutor. The school has two main figureheads, Professor Court and Professor Means. Professor Court represents the searching for the truth, while Professor Mean represents the end justified the means, two divergent ideals that separate the body of the school. Before the seminar, there is a mock trial between the top students, with the one student making the case, and in this case, Juniper Woods from the tutorial. The case is submitted by the students, and Professor Court chooses the proper case, while only the student and professor knowing the details. Unfortunately, during the mock trial, Professor Court is murdered the exact same way that Juniper's victim is, and all the details of the body match. Thus, as you can guess, since only Juniper and Professor Court knew the details of said body, she is the accused for this case. Athena is the one that takes the the reins with Apollo as the helper. As you can guess from the last case, it seems that Athena and Blackwell know each other, and they have excellent chemistry in court together, making their trials relatively solid in this case. There are also hints into Athena's motivation to become a lawyer, signed to try to save someone. However, the whole Dark Age of the Law theme is truly shoved into your throat in this case, with it taking over the legal system, causing it to be a little inauthentic, especially with the intro case, it being hyped to be an apocalyptic event, which in reality I can understand people not trusting the court system to be bad, but the presentation is almost Armageddon levels of worry. Also, remember the prosecutor for the seminar with Phoenix? It happens to be Prosecutor Gavin from Apollo Justice, which he's just only here for filler. Professor Gore happens to be his mentor, and apart from the cool trial/investigation mix, that's it. He doesn't appear for the rest of the series, which again is a consequence for the different direction. Other than that, the case does its job to progress the story forward. Now we move on to the cosmic turnabout, which oddly starts with the trial. The context is that a rocket launch went wrong via an explosion. One of the astronauts was stabbed after escaping the wreckage. The victim in question is Clay Tarrant, who's Apollo's best friend. I have a question for you. Was Clay mentioned at all during Apollo Justice? The answer is no! Even in this game, he's referenced in 5 lines roughly in a mini segue at the end of the last case. However, as you can see from his demeanor and story throughout from this case, he's very important to Apollo. So why is he introduced now? Like, Capcom is saying, okay, here's our new character Athena, surround the story about her and Blackwell and other stuff, but oh yeah, we have this character Apollo from last game and his arc, so let's make something up about his backstory so he's included, and here we are. The case obviously explains the connection with more in depth, but I wish we met the guy and had conversations with him. This would make us care a little more, especially since he's the reason for Apollo's I'm fine line, which is a major part for his character. Imagine if Larry died from the last trilogy. Even with this stupidity, Phoenix and the player would instantly care about the case due to his interactions from him in the past. But it feels very forced in this case due to the way it was introduced. Moving along, the defendant is one Solomon Starbuck, who's famous within the universe for an event called the Hat One Miracle, and Apollo and Clay's hero. But again, I wish we knew beforehand because it's very important in this case and the story of New Destinies. This was about a mission to retrieve a space rock. However, during the trip, the ship got heavily damaged, but he managed to get home safely. The current launch was going to be the first one since the miracle, and it happened at the Cosmos space station. And strangely, everyone was tense with Apollo and Blackwell being on edge the whole time during the trial. As the trial progressed, it turns out that the launch was sabotaged via bomb detonation, and during the investigation they found another, and during this trial the bomb gets armed. This caused the courtroom explosion, and unfortunately, due to his stubbornness for finding his friend's killer, which again we don't have a reason to really care about, he stays too long and gets injured while trying to save Juniper. So, which you may have guessed already, this was the same bomb incident from the tutorial case. Therefore, the chronological case order for this game goes 2, 3, first half of 4, 1, second half of 4, 5. Like, why does it have to be so complicated? But this does go back to the point with Apollo. This order is supposed to show him and Athena working together, bonding over cases, and giving us a shock change of him leaving. But with Clay as being essentially a mystery until he dies, it could have been so much more and much more impactful of the way if it was done correctly. Anyways, Phoenix takes over the case with Athena since Apollo left to do his own investigation after the events of the first case. They visit the Cosmos space station, meeting the director Yuri Cosmos, who is so important that he has his own scooter, and they discover a few things. One is that the bombing was not random and was in fact a terrorist attack that has happened before. The previous situation was related to Blackwell's old case that ushered in the Dark Age of the Law, with something along the lines of a phantom being behind all of it, making him more intense than ever before, thus making Detective Wright turn to our side to help. We also meet another character, Or Blackwell, who works at the Cosmos space station and is a sister to Simon, and she also weirdly recognizes Athena, calling her the queen of the station. This was substantiated with Athena being overly familiar with the place during the investigation. We also get some context of Apollo leaving at the beginning of the game, with the backstory with Clay, him breaking down, and insinuating another method of finding the truth, which was really well done. Do I wish that Clay was introduced still and they had more than one line of development for each case? Absolutely. But at least something was done to make you care for Clay in a way, albeit it could have been so much more. Moving forward with the trial, Phoenix and co were able to prove that Starbuck was not guilty. However, while doing so, they indicated another person with the help of Fulbright's evidence. Athena. With that major twist, we transition to the final case of the game, Turnabout for Tomorrow. As you can guess, this takes place right after the end of the last case. After the trial ends, Phoenix immediately investigates how Athena could possibly be a suspect, which it turns out she was there the day of the murder. During this investigation, many other things come to light integral to the story. The main one being surrounding Athena, which turns out she lived at the Space Center along with her mother. It turns out that her mother and Blackwell's sister Aura worked in the robotics division of the center researching analytical psychology, and Simon was her protege, which explains both of their backgrounds. It turns turns out that the Hat 1 miracle was caused by a bombing, which caused the miracle to occur. However, there was also a murder over a stolen moon rock at the facility, and it turns out Athena's mother was actually murdered, which Simon was accused and convicted of. Athena didn't believe it, and thus her inspiration was to save Simon. This was the case that caused the Dark Age of the Law, and it's clear that the case along with the current one are connected. Oh, and Simon will be executed tomorrow, which explains the case name, and Athena is being targeted as the true culprit, since if Simon's innocent, it must be the person who is responsible for these crimes. So this is just a small amount of pressure, and or holds Trucy and people hostage to get the case retried in conjunction with the current issue. Lovely stuff. So the final two cases of the game act as one, with Phoenix continuing to find the Phantom, save Athena and Simon, and stop the Dark Age of the Law. I won't talk about anything further, but the final case again was great since it did a solid job making both cases cohesive and building the story while continuing the high stakes mentioned into the insane finale in spite of its corniness of the Dark Age of the Law. The story of Athena and Simon is very tragic, and Edgeworth returning is a nice touch. I know I also talked bad about Apollo a lot in this game, but I really enjoyed his arc being complete since it is in line with Apollo Justice. He doesn't blindly trust everyone like Phoenix, making him turn on Athena. He has no reason to doubt his instincts in his bracelet, which caused him to leave the agency because he was likely worried about that Phoenix may forge evidence. This is also in line with his lack of respect between the two characters, with Phoenix not giving Apollo any respect, as seen in the newest Trilogy jokes, causing Apollo to resent him, making this decision even easier. This all culminated in this case with Apollo's friend being dead, his investigation pointing to Athena, and he knows that Phoenix will blindly protect Athena. If it wasn't for the most ungodly bluff from Phoenix, Apollo may have never come back and finally truly believe in his clients. I know I talked about how I liked Apollo Justice not believing everyone, especially with the events of his game, but this moment of him realizing the power of Phoenix's way were perfect for the story, and it did make Dual Justice wrap up more cohesively. However, Trucy and Gavin were still done so dirty. But the new characters they added are also welcome additions, and if they keep fleshing them out, maybe Phoenix taking a back seat would be great, because since I think 3 characters are still a little too much to get meaningful development, so it can't work out. Also, thank God the Dark Age of the Law is over. But you know what they did? They went back to focusing on Apollo and screw over Athena. Spirit of Justice is essentially back to a Phoenix Apollo game, where Trucy even gets more spotlight compared to Athena in this game. I mean, look at the cover arts of the DS games. She is just gone. So why was this game after Dual Destinies? I know I understand it's for the story and all that type of stuff, but why did we bother to introduce Athena at the point of time where the case cast aside her again, and with even much worse treatment compared to Apollo Justice and the other games? We were just bouncing all over the place, and due to Dual Destinies' position in the franchise, it caused Apollo's development to feel very unnatural. So a detail I left out was that in the final case of Dual Destinies, Phoenix gets a letter from Maya saying that she's almost done being the master of the Karayan channeling technique. She is currently in the country of Karayan, and Phoenix is going to visit her in the first case of the next game, The Foreign Turnabout. By the way, before I move forward, I'm going to say that the entire game, I love almost every aspect of what they did to establish the Kingdom of Karayan. The visuals are impeccable. The amount of effort to establish the kingdom's cultures, laws, traditions, and music really envelops you in the world and distinguishes it from America, which I love. The country is run by the royal family, which just plays a role a little bit later. They are also very religious, with it being surrounded around the royal mother, who is the one who created this Karayan spirit channeling technique, thus connecting this country to the Fae family. Back to the case, Phoenix lands in Karayan and it's 2 weeks before he can visit Maya. Maya sends over a guide to show Phoenix all the landmarks and traditions and learn more about the country. However, of course, the guide gets arrested. Trials work a little differently compared to America. Lawyers are hated in the country, and I mean really hated. It's essentially the most prosecuted favored trial, where contradictions and witness don't exist, the accused are just guilty every time. Oh, and the lawyer received the same punishment as the accused, which most of the time is death. The victim in the case was the security guard of the Sacred Orb, which is an international treasure and has never been opened or seen by the general public. Since unlocked, it can show the founder's true face, which is a taboo within the religion. Moving along, as you can guess, Phoenix takes the risk of, death and becomes the lawyer. As mentioned in the intro, the divination seance is introduced in this case by the way of the Princess of Karayan, Raifa, and her interpretation is normally taken as fact. However, Phoenix used it as testimony to find contradictions, which shifted the tides of the trial. The case is solid, but does introduce a lot of new concepts, which can be good or bad, making it the longest tutorial case at over 2 hours, which are longer than some mainline cases in the series. Also, the whole hating lawyer shtick does get old, especially when we have unskippable voiced cutscenes with regard to the gallery. After the victory, which is monumental for the country as making the news in the US, we get insight into the current issue of the country, with the rebel group known as the Defiant Dragons challenging the royal family about the current regime, which coincided with a warning from the Justice Minister about us being rebellious, which goes to show how corrupt the kingdom is. We go back to America for the next case case with Apollo and Athena with the magical turnabout. This case follows Trucy's first magic show after finally receiving the rights of the Grandmire family, which is a game late, but you know, here we are. However, of course, something goes wrong and unfortunately someone dies during the show and she's accused of murder. Phoenix cannot come back to the US in time, so he trusts the defense to Apollo, openly saying it, which makes Apollo very happy. This was ironically the first time him saying that he openly trusts Apollo, showing the theme of respect coming in from prior games. His arc of getting his approval after Apollo Justice and Duel of Destinies are finally coming true, marking the point of him being a lawyer in Phoenix's eyes. The case is short and sweet, with being very fun with a magical concept, which is perfect for the first full length of the case. Apollo's obviously the main focus, and it seems that he matured very well in a short period of time, and he's finally coming into his own. The case also goes more in depth about Trucy, which is always great, and that scene where Apollo asks to be her lawyer while all hope seems lost is very emotional, and very well done. The case also expands on the Grandmires, with the hidden third project that was teased in Apollo Justice was finally come to fruition. The case as a whole is a sequel to Apollo Justice, which I think I'm a little biased towards, but this should have happened in Duel of Destinies. Emma even returns as the detective and gets her job as a forensic analyst, and she's much more cheery due to it, in contrast to Apollo Justice. However, there is a major pain point, and this is the prosecutor for this game, Nayuta Samahi. He's an international prosecutor from the Kingdom of Khura'in, and he's never lost, which makes sense since no one has lost in that country in 27 years. He can barely see the flow of the trial and predict where it's going, and he is by far the worst prosecutor the series ever seen, and it's not even close. He's just antagonistic to whoever the lawyer is, and has virtually no growth until the last case, and even then it's not even that good. Yes, pretty much in cases 2, 3, and 4, he's pretty much the exact same. So for your time, I won't talk about him until later. We also get a teaser that Apollo and Nayuta somehow know each other, which is cool and all, but again, goes back to the whole thing where they make up Apollo's past. After that case, we go back to the Kingdom of Khura'in for the third case, the Wright of Turnabout. After 2 weeks, Phoenix is finally able to visit Maya after all this time. To complete her training, she needs to complete the Purification Rite, which is honoring Lady Kira, who is a deity that the country reveres for saving them many years ago from something. Anyways, we finally get to see Maya again, and she really hasn't changed much. The tone is very upbeat, and since Phoenix doesn't have an assistant in Khura'in, they will likely tackle a case together, which is always a... Honestly, I'm not surprised. Yep, Maya is again being accused of murder, and this time the High Priest who was there during the Purification Rite. The trial is of course in Khura'in, so we have the divination seance again, and hostility from the first case. The prosecutor is sadly Nayuta, which... Moving on to more important things, we get much more context about the country, mainly through Raifa, the princess of Khura'in and the one who handles the divination seance. She acts as your assistant in this case to prevent you from forging evidence. She's pretty much the epitome of Khura'in in a teenage girl's mindset. She also greatly respects her parents, who we meet during the case. However, as time moves on, the seeds of doubt are planted within her, as Phoenix, with who he is, pretty much is a contradiction of the depiction of lawyers throughout her life. We also get some backstory on the rebels as well, with us being captured by them. The main reason for their existence is the corrupt regime and the DC Act, which is about the lawyers being guilty as accused. This essentially became a place where prosecutors run supreme and everything could be manipulated. This started 23 years ago with the assassination of the former Queen Amara by the rebel leader Dirk, who is a lawyer, sparking their hatred. And the big twist with the Defiant Dragons is... they aren't bad people. What, do you expect because I zoomed in the screen that I make some weird reaction or some groundbreaking recovery? I'm not that predictable. Oh yeah, and we also find out that Apollo and Nayuta are pretty much brothers and are both sons of Dirk. What? So the reason for the tension in the second case was because they grew up together. I understand Nayuta's side and since a need for his character and with some connection to the rebels and anything like that. But again, for Apollo, similar to Clay, this is just so random and no hints of foreshadowing, making it feel so out of place while looking at the trilogy as a whole. The case overall, I would say, is very solid with many twists and turns that happen throughout and a very unique premise for both murders and with the reasoning behind them. The reintroduction of the spirit channeling as a concept is nice as well and integral for the story while also finishing Maya's arc in terms of her ability. The case also does reinforce what was brought up in the tutorial case, creating a better atmosphere of the country and the place as a whole. But the whole lawyer hating shtick does reach its boiling point here, especially with Nayuta having as much depth as a shallow pond with his lines. After the trial is over, the revolution begins literally, with the rebels seemingly taking over the courthouse due to the actions and revelation within the case. As we get into Turnabout storyteller, have I been forgetting someone? Oh yeah, Athena, arguably the centerpiece of Duel Destiny. Surely she gets a meaningful case, she gets the worst case arguably in the series. The case is only a trial with no investigations, less than 2 hours long, which is less than the tutorial case might I add, and it's literally no significance to the story. A true definition of filler. Like, I don't think I could try to make this case less meaningless, and she's arguably given the worst defendant in the series, with his redeeming quality being that he vomits a lot. It's a real slap in the face, and if you told someone who just played Duel Destinies that her only case in Spirit Justice is a meaningless case about a Rakugo storyteller, which, no offense, they would be dumbfounded, which again goes back to the problem of introducing her at Dual Destinies. I'm not against introducing her with her stories and characters. In fact, Simon is the only redeeming quality in this case. But as said before, with 3 protagonists to create stories and only 5 cases to tell those stories, usually someone is left out. In Dual Destinies, it was mainly Apollo, and in this game, it was Athena. But as said before, at least Apollo gets a cool arc in the background. Athena gets a simple trial, and she does nothing else for the rest of the game other than keeping up appearances. The case tries to grow her character with the theme of her not being a kid and being a competent lawyer, especially with Nayuta's diverse lines. It was just very forced, and this easily could have done better in more meaningful ways. After that experience, we move into the final case of the game and the trilogy, Turnabout Revolution. These final cases are usually these epic long cases that have many twists and turns throughout, and this case is no different. However, there's a lot more emphasis on the length, considering this case is 10 hours long. This is just a little too long in my opinion, but it does wrap up the story. The case is essentially split into 2 parts, and the case overall is from a perspective of Apollo. The first part relates to the discoveries in Wright of Turnabout, where Dirk visits Apollo to make up for lost time and secure the Founder's Orb from the first case. There's of course an issue with this, and it turns into a civil dispute, with Phoenix surprisingly taking one side and Apollo on the other. And of course there is a murder in this, so the civil case is just a way to have them face each other. It was a pretty cool case concept with the whole changing of the garb angle to see what facing Phoenix is like, from him being so confident then doing the most ungodly of bluffs. However, if there was something to hypothetically remedy the case's length, they maybe could have shortened it, since I'm sure they could have continued the arc another way, or maybe said the important info somewhere else. However, I still very much enjoyed it. After the victory, things turned to the worst, where due to the kidnapping of Maya by the Justice Minister, they need to go back to Khura'in to resolve the matter. This resolution of course turned into murder. What a shocker, with Dirk being accused of murdering the minister. With him being finally captured, he was also charged with the murder of the previous queen, as mentioned before, making this final trial based on a double homicide, and it's up to Phoenix and Apollo to solve it. So much happens in this case, with many arcs coming to conclusion, such as Rafa and Nayuta, but it would take a lot of time to talk about it. So for the sake of this video, I'll focus on the main man for the trilogy, Apollo, since this case wraps up his arc. We go more in depth about his backstory with Dirk and Nayuta, which was very well done and adds depth to his character and the others, specifically with Dirk. The whole father-son bonding time was very wholesome to experience, and was one of the reasons why I didn't mind the extensive length to really dig in these characters. However, this is absolutely needed, since as you heard from me countless times, it came out of nowhere. They even made fun of it for it coming out of left field at the beginning of the case, not hiding them just making stuff up to fit the game. Casting that aside, the most important question is, does he become the lawyer that Phoenix respects? Well, technically it was in the last case that he finally said that he respects Apollo, but he does absolutely become that lawyer. He turns on his ultra instinct in these trials and essentially becomes a god among defense attorneys. Sure, he gets surprised here and there, but there isn't a moment of hesitation from his actions, and his perseverance is even respected by Phoenix. It's finally great to see this happening, with him getting the official nod from Phoenix. However, it does seem a tad bit rushed. Like in the context of the whole trilogy, he's basing the shadow of Phoenix in the first game, has a cool arc in the background in the second, but doesn't do too much in terms of leading a charge in a case, and then boom, he is just him. I think they may have realized that they need to wrap up his character before the trilogy ends, so they completed the arc in this game. This is abundantly clear with the amount of random details that they came up with his backstory, and their main justification is that he doesn't like talking about it, which kind of seems cheesy, but you gotta do what you gotta do. But I will say that it is still a satisfying ending to the trilogy and as a whole, with him leading his own agency back in Khura'in to rebuild their system. So I hope you understand my point of view when it comes to the trilogy. Again, as I said, I believe that these games are still solid. The ending makes sense where Apollo is finally on his own carving his path, but in terms of focus, I wish it was more at the forefront, but due to said direction, it needed to be pushed aside to supplement the new additions to the series. In other words, I really enjoyed the most that these games offered, just not how we got there in the comparison to previous games. Like the number of cases that Apollo was in made it really difficult, but it was not entirely impossible to be done. For example, for this trilogy, you play as Apollo 7 times, which my God, that's embarrassing. However, if we look at the great Ace Attorney games, Ryunosuke is played for 9 cases, and they both have very similar arcs in terms of where they end up. However, the key difference is, again, we focus on Ryunosuke for those 9 cases straight, and with Apollo, it's all over the place. We focus on him, Athena, Phoenix, Athena, him. It's just never really one clear direction. Now for the series moving forward, they've remastered every game, or released the rest on modern platforms. If I had to guess for the next game, it will either be the great Ace Attorney 3, which just yes, or Ace Attorney 7 focusing on Athena, which is also a very good option. Now, moving with the next video on this channel, I'm most certainly going to do other games in the series at some point, but I figured you'd just be tired of me rambling about this series, so I figured I would do a game that I have never played before to make it more of a review rather than an essay. Well, that's all for me. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and see ya!